we should let's talk about it. We got Roderick, who is calling in from Washington. Roderick, you are live on Truth Wanted. What do you want to talk about?
How's it going, guys? I think we were going to talk about the difference between gender and sex.
Yeah, I
So
see
what's
that. You
your
said
stance
you
on
wanted to
that?
talk
And do
about.
you believe there? Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah. Do
What was
we
that?
believe that sex and gender are different? I'm just reading what the call screener had wrote. Is that right?
Right. Right.
I
Yeah.
believe they're different.
Yeah, 100%. I totally believe they're different. I think that's been established for many years now. I think everybody who has studied this issue long enough can very definitively say that, yeah, sex and gender are super different things. So
So
that's it.
why do you
That's
believe
it.
that?
Why do I believe that? I think there's published scientists in fields like sociology and anthropology and
Mhm.
biology who all agree on this idea that gender is a socially constructed idea, particularly in anthropology, is when this idea is most developed. But gender being this idea of social constructs, and sex also having implications of social constructs, more socially constructed than what some people initially think, of course related to biology, but is also culturally constructed in many senses. Gender, of course, being like completely constructive by human beings, I think is broadly the consensus of folks who studied the field. Yeah, and that's why I believe that. So, Brady, did you have a different reason, or?
No, I think absolutely when it
Yeah.
comes to something that is a construct, then you go into more of a sociology and things are descriptive, they're not prescriptive. So obviously there are so many different gender constructs, especially whenever I was brought up in evangelicalism and came out and then started to actually interact with the actual gay community, not just the gay community that I was told exist, but
Mm.
actually started to meet the ones that do exist and understand like, oh wow, there's so much different ways of expressing oneself. And yeah, this is absolutely a construct
Yeah.
and relying on old dusty books to make a one-to-one comparison to gender and sexuality just isn't beneficial for humanity today.
Yeah. So there you go, Roderick. What do you think?
All right. Well, I could use convincing with more specific examples of evidence, but setting that aside for a minute, what do you think is the implications of the idea, were it to be true or to be believed in, that gender and sex are different? What are the implications of that belief?
Well, I don't know. Implications. I mean, it means that people can. I don't think that gender is something that you have to just stick with for your whole life. I think gender is something you can freely choose, and I don't even think you have to experience dysmorphia in any particular way to like have a change in your gender expression. I think anybody can choose whatever kind of gender expression they want and choose to call themselves with whatever pronouns or whatever whatever dress, whatever speech, whatever way they want to present themselves, they're free to do it. So I don't think they have to be held back by whatever body parts they have or whatever their body looks to other people. Whatever makes them happy and whatever they're most
Right.
comfortable with
So,
is what they should be free to do. That's my thoughts.
yeah, freedom is number one on any good society. I agree with that.
Mm.
So you've got now gender expression as well. What does that term mean?
Well, gender
Is that
expression,
basically the
right?
way that you present in the clothing that you wear?
Yeah, I mean, so
Correct.
like a lot of society, particularly Western societies, have sort of hierarchical constructs of what your gender is supposed to be, right? And what your options are in your society, and even legal restrictions on what you're able to do. Less so now than in previous times, but it used to be that women couldn't vote, women couldn't own property, women couldn't do run for office. Like there was a lot of things that women couldn't do because they just weren't seen as equal to men. And so there's obviously been forces that equalize that. But on top of that, there's also been expressions as well that have been sort of restricted. So the most fundamental Christian places out there will tell you, yeah, women need to wear dresses. They need to be dressing in a quote feminine way. They need to be keepers of the house. They need to be raisers of children. So there's obviously limitations that come with those kinds of roles if that's all you're able to do. And that's not to say that any of those things are bad on their own, but if it's your only choice, it's not really fair, right? If you're just born differently. So yeah, having freedom of gender expression also means freedom to explore different roles in life and freedom to explore different perceptions of society, and to be able to shift and morph and change. And it may mean that the way we see gender now is going to change 10 years from now from the common consensus. And in my opinion, that's totally fine. But I'm speaking a lot about it. Brady, what do you think?
I agree with everything you're saying, and I
Mm.
appreciate how articulate you are with it because as a member of the queer community, as an LGBT gay man, like it is difficult. There were so many expectations that are given to us, and it's so binary. But the deal with gender expression is that I remember there was a quote from the writer of Harriet the Spy, and she said, "For as many people as there are alive, there's that many different types of way of living your life."
Mhm.
That's not a great quote, but the idea is that we're all different. And I remember growing up in a place where I wasn't. What was inside was not what I was supposed to be doing. And as a kid who wanted to serve the Lord and wanted to do the best that I can within my belief system, I remember trying my hardest to do that. And it now that I look back at it, it felt like a performance because it wasn't who I truly was. But then it was me doing the best with what I have
Yeah.
because I was told that everyone should
Well,
fit
then
into
who
these
are
certain
you truly?
boxes. Who I am truly is who I am now. And that's a gay man. I have a
What does
very
that mean to
feminine
you?
side. That means to me that I'm able to pursue sexually who I'm attracted to and have consent with and good communication with. That means I'm not held to old laws or old religious ideas that certain beliefs would make me go to hell, et cetera, whatever. But for me, I'm able to, within the confines of my ethics, were built on not harming others and having consent and communication, that I'm able to freely within those realms express myself and enjoy my experiences, whether they're sexual or not, just even being around other queer people who have had to go through weird situations or have had to fit into normative restrictions that weren't really natural to who we are. Even us just talking about our experiences is affirming because we're talking to somebody else who had to go through that same thing of being told who we were instead of being able to tell people who we are.
Yeah.
So, like the whole point of gay pride and everything now is about expressing this is who we are. And it's not as a defense, but as a proud declaration because we deserve just as much space and honor and respect as other people who may even have their only gender expressions communicated through religious text. But we're not trying to change other people, but they are trying to change us.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, identity is a lot socially negotiated, whether it's, not specifically what we're speaking of right now, but your status, your place of your hierarchy and where you are and how people perceive you is something that you negotiate and is not always something that you're able to tell someone. It's a
Can
kind of
I
an
can I
agreement.
ask maybe can I
But
ask maybe why gender expression matters to you? Like other people's gender expression?
it's just kind of a hot topic right now, I suppose. And if we're getting back a little bit back on track, so we had gender, gender expression, and then another term that I wanted to clarify was sex and how sex and gender expression are different.
Yeah. So, full disclosure, I don't have a biology degree. I don't have an anthropology degree. I don't have a sociology degree. So anything that I talk about on
Well,
this
that's
is
fine.
purely a layman's opinion on the matter. But sex, as well as gender, has had changes over time in how we define it. It is for most people, for most periods of time, they've kind of simplified it. It's just been okay. Well, you have certain looks to your faces. You have these kinds of certain body parts, and so that means that you're either a man or a woman, and it's kind of fallen into this binary. But the more that we've kind of understood human physiology, the more that we've realized there's actually a more complex picture. So one of the most common examples that gets brought up in this conversation is, of course, the existence of intersex people. Intersex people being people who have body parts that could be androgynous in nature, body parts that don't neatly fall into binary categories of male or female, and they're actually more common than what might most people would think. At least one organization, I can't recall, it says that there's at least one in every 10,000 people that have intersex characteristics, and that could be a list of different
Okay.
criteria. And that doesn't necessarily mean that intersex people don't feel that they're one sex one way or the other, but it does kind of cast these shades of gray. Now, some people say, okay, well, we just have to look at people's chromosomes. Well, if you look at people's chromosomes, and remember what
Mhm.
chromosomes are the genetic information that's coded within the DNA of every human being. Turns out that there's people with extra X chromosomes or extra Y chromosomes, but still present in their genders in particular ways, even though they may not even realize that their physiology can be different from other human beings. So the more that we study sex, the more that we realize, oh, there actually is kind of a spectrum to sex as well. It's not just gender that has this sort of spectrum.
That's
But
a good point.
the problem with it, of course, is that you can't really tell. You're not going to be able to tell by looking at me, knowing how many chromosomes I am, right? Unless you're taking DNA samples. It's not
Yeah,
something
like
that we can really experience in our
99.9%
daily
of the
life.
time I
So,
would,
yeah. Well, sorry, I couldn't hear you there. Say that again.
because the incidence rate you said was really low.
Well, 1 in 10,000
Both
is
of those,
not that
but
low if you think about how
that's
common that
pretty
actually
low.
is.
I mean, 1 in
I mean, think
10,000. That's
But also it doesn't really,
of a
it doesn't
percentage. I
matter.
don't.
And kind of this obsession with, because I'm assuming political or other things have influenced you to saying it's a hot topic, but hot topic issue. It's not because you're experiencing anything. It's because you had to be told what's going on, what the debate sides are, and it kind of your interest is as a third party. And really, there's something kind of dehumanizing about only talking about intersex people whenever we're having a debate. And there's something kind of dehumanizing about having this conversation about other people's gender expression because it's not harming you or even affecting you of any way other than being told that you need to care about it because it's a hot. When I asked you
Yeah.
why would you care about this, it was just, well, because a lot of people are talking about it. But really, that's not how empathy works. That's not how sharing in a community works.
Yeah. But even just to finish what
Mhm.
I wanted to say on that too is that I brought up the example of intersex because I think it's the most accessible example. But
Oh,
as I
not
mentioned,
you. Yeah.
of course, but it's one of many types of differences in physiology that we can see that get extremely complicated on the nuances. And the fact is,
Yes.
in everyday life, it just gets too complicated for us to have sexual categories for every single person that we meet. And to be honest, it's not even necessary. What really is necessary is what people want to call themselves. And that's really it. It's really what makes people the most comfortable and what's going to make them the most happy. That's all I really care about, unless we're addressing people's specific medical needs, right?
Mm.
If there's specific medical needs where their specific number of chromosomes or their specific sex characteristics are going to matter, they're going to help themselves for that, right? I trust that people are going to make that decisions for what they need for themselves. But even beyond that, it's not my business. It's whatever that they and their medical healthcare providers are going to take care of for themselves. That's for them to decide. It's not up for me. What is up for me, what I can control, is how I talk to people, how I make people feel comfortable in their daily world and in their environment, and how I can gain their respect as well as give them the respect that they deserve. And that includes calling people by the pronouns that they want to be called, identifying people by the gender that they'd like to be
Absolutely.
identified, because
Absolutely.
that's what I'd want for myself. And I'm saying this as a straight cis guy. I have no skin in the game for myself personally. It's just I have friends who have identities that are different from mine, and I like them to be happy. And that's really all there is to it, you know.
Yeah, personal freedoms is really important.
Mm.
And then when we're talking about implications, to bring it back, I suppose one of the implications is that there would be trans children
Yeah. Trans children exist.
So what is your stance on that? The medical treatment of trans children?
Well, I think there's a lot of misconceptions. And again, I'm speaking as a layman. I don't have any professional credentials to talk about this topic. But if you ask me my opinion on it, there are a lot of misconceptions that happen on the treatment of trans children. There's a lot of people that think that there are, as soon as a kid identifies as trans, they're going to throw every single drug at them to do whatever they want with their bodies. And that's really not the case. It depends on the age of the child and where they're at in their development on what's the most appropriate treatment. But it usually 99% of the time is always going to start with therapy. It's always going to start with, again, those conversations with their provider. Different states have different requirements for exactly how long until they can receive any kinds of other like hormone treatments. But the thing is, we all get hormones put against our will anyway, right? When we're born. And as we grow up as human beings, there's always going to be hormones that grow in us. And sometimes that's not to our benefit. Sometimes we would like to have that change. I think body modification, it seems to be fine when I get my ear pierced or someone gets a tattoo or somebody gets plastic surgery. But we seem to, for some people, when we put other kinds of body modifications within us, that seems to be a taboo. And I think that's unnecessary and also directly harmful for people who do want to start making those transitions and those choices for themselves. Again, it's one of those things where it's none of my business. It's up to the professionals that understand the situation way better than I do. And it seems to be that the research so far, while limited, seems to be at least positive towards the idea that yes, early trans children receiving the kinds of treatments that they need at their age needs to be to their benefit and doesn't seem to be detrimental. So again, that's my opinion.
I don't think there's any research about the long-term mental health outcomes for.
You're and you're right. There, it's the long-term outcomes are extremely limited at the moment. But it's and that's something that we'll have to do. But short-term outcomes.
Your only entrance in caring is people who are trying to fight against it politically. So again, I want you to kind of reflect on yourself a little bit of why do you care about what other people are doing with their genitals? Like I'm trying to be polite and I understand that it's a hot button topic, but at the same time, you as a completely detached man calling and wanting to have a discussion about what kids are doing with their private parts is not because it's concerning to you. It's because you've been told to care about this and you've been told the talking points and you've been told why you should care. And it has to do with power and taking the power away from people being able to make decisions for themselves all over some third party non-existent care that doesn't make sense.
Say again?
Kids can't really make decisions for themselves at that age.
And you can't make it for them either. And it doesn't make any sense of why we're discussing it with you because you have absolutely no relationship to the situation. Like you're not an expert. You're just a guy who's been told to care about this because your political leaders have told you to care about it because it has to do with them remaining in power. So I'm sorry, but why are we having this conversation with you, sir?
So
why do you care?
Well, if it's children that might regret it later, like desistance was shown to reduce the rates of transition, and also 53% of mothers of boys with reported gender dysphoria meet the criteria for borderline personality disorder. So
cite that for me, please.
A young trans boy is actually more likely than not to have a mother with borderline personality disorder, which is a serious condition. And that's something we need to look at when considering the decision that we're making for our policy.
Yeah. And I trust that the experts, I trust that the men and women whose careers are in actually treating trans children in the kind of care that they need, which by the way, again, isn't always hormones. It's a lot of different things. I trust that the ones who are actually keeping up with the research and who are actually doing this know what they're talking about more than I do. and probably know the statistics more
Why
than I
would you
do.
trust
And
them
I also think
if
that
their jobs are on
somebody
the
who
line?
has I also don't see why somebody whose parent is borderline personality disorder has anything to do with why they can't be trans. But you know,
It's
it is what
because
it is.
the rate of incidence is correlated.
Okay, well, let's say that's true. So what?
So if you
Being a white man is
if you don't
correlated
treat
with
the thing
school
as a
shootings.
whole, you don't you're not taking the full weight of the situation into consideration with your treatment.
Right. Why does it matter? Why does it matter? Why?
Because as a psychologist, your job is to provide the best care considering
What? Okay,
all
but Roderick,
factors.
let's say you, as a psychologist, you're treating a young trans child and you find out that their mother or father has bipolar disorder. How are you going to change your treatment of care?
Well, then you would say that it's probably a lot less likely that that child would have experienced dysphoria if
Why?
their mother had not.
Why on earth would you say that?
Well, why wouldn't?
Okay, you see how there's no reason?
How else
Because
would you explain?
here's the deal, Roderick.
Explain the
You
result.
can find every reason under the sun not to treat trans people as much as you want. The fact is there are and will always be children who are trans. That's it. It's a fact of life. There are going to be children who experience dysphoria, and beyond that, there's not even going to be kids who experience dysphoria. There's just going to be kids who want to express themselves differently, and I think we should let them. I don't think that there's any reason not to. Are there complications that could happen because certain treatments have side effects that we want to mitigate?
Yeah.
Absolutely, 100%. And that's why the people who are doing this every day are very aware of that and are trying to be in very delicate control of their situation. It's why pediatricians exist, because you have to take children differently than you can adults when you do treatments. I mean, it's the same principles at play here. You know?
And my recommendation would be, if you do believe in freedom, stop being creepy. Stop being creepy about what you put your attention on and what you want to ask questions about. If you want to talk about freedom, then understand that democracy is sharing space with people that are different than you, and they don't need to have the same beliefs as you. And so the fact that you're trying to say that you believe in freedom, but also in the same breath want to ask questions about children's genitals is kind of creepy, man. Like and also, if we were to find out what your demographics were, and then Dan and I could probably take maybe a half a second and it come up with ways that we need to regulate you because your demographic has done bad things too, I bet. So what if we start policing how many guns you can have, or if you're allowed to go out in public, or if you're allowed to go to movie theaters because people who look like you might shoot up a movie theater or whatever. If you don't want that sort of treatment, then don't allow your right-wing politicians to influence you to be concerned with things that have absolutely no concern with you, and for you to keep asking questions and pushing on your agenda regarding kids' genitals, because it's creepy. It might be time to move
asking questions so we can come to a general consensus regardless of our different opinion. And one final question I might ask is, what number of children who would have desisted without regret would you treat without... Okay, I'm trying to ask this. How many mistakes are allowed in this system? So if you treat one for 1,000 that don't regret it, is that an acceptable number?
I don't know what you mean by mistakes. I'm assuming you mean people who regret procedures that they got in earlier life.
So yeah, let's say 1 out of 5,000. Okay, so now you're going to shut it off, and then now your flip statistics are 4,999 versus 1. Roderick, you need to move on.
Yeah, I would, you know, I would talk to people. I wouldn't ask folks like me. I would ask folks who are, again, like in the business of actually giving trans kids share, and ask like what actually happens in a lot of these procedures. And you might be surprised what actually happens when we're talking about helping kids figure out their gender identity and what that means in terms of medical care. It's very complicated. There's a lot to it. It's more than just, oh, we're gonna give them puberty blockers. Oh, we're gonna do X, Y, and Z. Like, yeah, that is part of it, but there's a lot of care that happens outside of just puberty blockers. It's a lot of stuff. So I would talk to people who are experts on it, but that's really is all the time we got. We've been on the call for about almost 17 minutes there. So we do have to move on. We got a lot of folks who want to talk to us.